Welcome to this dev diary on Sucker Punch. Sucker Punch is a 9-map map set for Doom 2 I released back in 2018, and which is available now via the id Games archive. This WOD was the first time I designed a set of maps. All 9 of them are small and take just a few minutes to play. They're split into 3 sets of 3. Within each set, the maps gradually rise in difficulty. In this video you'll see me playing each map from a pistol start, and I'll explain how each one was designed. I played using GZ Doom 400 and the Smooth Doom mod on ultra-violence difficulty. If you want to try Sucker Punch yourself, you'll find that it's also compatible with other ports, including ZDoom, PR Boom Plus and Doom Retro. Alright, let's go. Okay, so here's map 1. This is called Maintenance Run. This was very consciously designed to be a very small, linear, and quite simple tech-based map. And although the map is designed to be easy relative to the rest of the set, because there's this progression of difficulty from map 1 to 2 to 3, I wanted the whole of the map set to be reasonably challenging even for people that have played a lot of Doom. So in this playthrough, having not played the map for a while, there's at least one occasion where I very nearly die. So you can see from a visual point of view there's a kind of a black and white theme to the map, and I find it helps, especially when you're working with a decent texture set like the Community Chest set, which is used for this particular map set. It's really good to have a really simple visual idea for each map. So this kind of black and white theme with a few bits of colour detailing is something that I stuck to for quite a lot of the first 3 maps of Sucker Punch. Now all of the detailing and the kind of layout of the maps is helped by the fact that it's a tech base, because it means that you can lose a lot of 90-degree angles and 45-degree angles. There's really no exteriors, so there's nothing that is designed to look really kind of naturalistic. Everything's very kind of man-made, which keeps things simpler. And the encounters are fairly straightforward as well. There's a lot of these monster closets that kind of open at 90 degrees to the player, and the player just has to flick a switch to open the next encounter. And it was this progression of hitting a switch, taking out some monsters, hitting another switch and revealing more monsters that caused me to give the map the title Maintenance Run, because that's kind of what it feels like. It's just doing some kind of mundane tasks, but with lots of monsters. I think this is kind of the key fight of the first map, which is where you get the blue key, and then there's a little bit of backtracking where some more enemies are brought in here, and there are a couple of secrets which I've left hidden in this particular video, I think. But there is a rocket launcher in this area which makes the last fight much easier than it would otherwise be. So you can see that this can be quite dangerous without the rocket launcher, especially on UV, as there's 2 vials here. And if they're left to their own devices for too long, even with only imps and the occasional chain gunner to resurrect, it can be quite dangerous. And this whole exit area is almost visible from the start position, which is another thing I like to do because it kind of orients the player and they basically know more or less where they're going. And of course the map is really short. This is only kind of 3 minutes, just about surviving, and already done with map 1. Alright, map 2 has quite a fast and furious start to it. This was designed to really allow the player to be attacked from quite a lot of angles. So when the player moves from their initial spawn point, they're already kind of surrounded on 3 sides by enemies. So the map becomes quite intense quite quickly, especially as more monsters arrive from these adjacent kind of monster closets. I think this map is quite a significant jump up in difficulty from map 1, but aesthetically it keeps the same kind of theme. It's very much a tech base, still fairly straightforward angles, no exteriors. The difference visually is that there's a lot more grey, kind of slate grey in this map, and some other people who've made some playthroughs of Sucker Punch have noticed that I owe a big debt to the mapper Skillsaw, who's also used the Community Chest for textures in his own great map sets like Lunatic and Vanguard, which are big favourites of mine. So there's quite a lot of continuity between what I've done and what he's done, especially the use of these kind of concrete textures. After this initial fight, there's quite a mean trap here. This is a bit more toothless really on difficulties below UV, but on UV it's actually quite tricky. The Revenants sometimes get a little bit lost because they kind of go upstairs, and that makes things a bit easier actually because they're a bit confused about where the player is. Again, I've kept some of the secrets out of this video just so there's still some stuff for you to find if you play yourself. Another thing I did in this particular map was to create this kind of underground basement area which is flooded. You can kind of trap the player down here temporarily, and there's a couple of separate fights. So one to actually reach a key which is at the back of this area, and then another fight to get out of this area which is quite a lot tougher. And as we'll see in a second, this involves a couple more archfiles spawning in. Now, a couple of people have kind of criticised the WOD for having quite a few archfiles in the early maps. And spoiler alert, there are archfiles in all three of the first three maps. But my philosophy is that most people that play Doom know how to deal with an archfile by now, and I don't think they're frightened of having vials in the first couple of maps. And there's quite a lot of map sets these days that have got cyber demons and spider masterminds in early maps as well. So I think it's quite fair. I think you can kind of see it coming, and I think it's fun to deal with. And again, after these pain elementals are down, another very short, simple tech-based map is all done. Now, map 3 definitely changes things up quite significantly. You can see there's red detailing here in this map because this is because it's map 3, because the difficulty's gone up another notch. It's called Those Who Wait because at the end of the day this map is really just about trying to survive long enough until the exit reveals itself. There's not much to the geometry of this map. It's really just a square surrounded by 12 teleport paths which enemies can warp in using. And what was easy about the map was actually doing the geometry, and what was more difficult is making these various waves of enemies warp in on time. And really, when you're working within a limit removing kind of method and you're not using scripting, which is what I did, you really just have to use floors, descending floors basically. So you have to make a kind of calculation about how long it takes floors to descend in order to get monsters to walk over a teleporting line at the right time to make these teleport ambushes work. So I'd say at least half of the effort of making this map was just timing the monsters properly and making them spawn in correctly. And although this is the toughest map of the first three and the end of this tech-based phase of Sucker Punch, I don't think it's as difficult as some players have found it to be, because if you look in the corners, there's actually way more resources and health and armour than the player should really need to complete the level. I think the only thing that can really go wrong is if the player doesn't spot the BFG, because without that, these vials and revenants are a big problem. But when the lift comes down, finally you can escape. So it was pointed out to me when I originally released the first three maps of Sucker Punch that if I was going to give the WOD that title, it really needed to have a Tyson map, and I agreed, so that was the reason why I eventually ended up making map 4 in the way that I did. This map is called Assault and Battery Acid, and it combines Berserk Fist, Tyson style gameplay with a floor that consists almost entirely of damaging toxins. So it means that the map really needs to be completed within 60 seconds because that's as long as a radiation suit will last. The map, as a result of that, is very, very linear. Makes a lot of use of this kind of green detailing because it's the easiest map of the second part of the WOD, maps 4, 5 and 6. And it's quite tricky, especially with a lot of these demons kind of getting in the way on UV. And actually in this particular playthrough, I ended up kind of avoiding the last monster here. But it's a very, very quick 60-second map, and hopefully an inoffensive bit of Tyson gameplay. Of all of the maps in Sucker Punch, map 05 is the one that definitely changed the most often. Originally it was actually going to consist of 3 separate arenas, each one of which was based on using a different weapon, and they were playable in any order, and they were all accessible via teleporters. This proved to be really difficult to balance, so in the end the 3 fights were combined into one location, and they were all based around the chain gun. For that reason the map is called House Full of Bullets, and almost all of the enemies are hit scanners, which some players really love, or not. So the map is based around these 3 fights, which take place in more or less the same location, which is really like an unfolding box, which is just spaced out a little bit by needing to find the key for this last quite difficult fight. The thing that makes the map work quite well, I think, is although there's only one type of ammo, the amount of ammo you have in the last fight is based on how many chain gunners are actually resurrected by the archfire. So there's a balance between fighting the chain gunners and fighting the archfire, because if you neglect the archfire, it just becomes unstoppable. And you can just kind of cheat and run around it and get to the exit, but it's much more fun to actually take the enemies down properly. That brings us to map 06. This one is called Revolution. So it's the last and most difficult map of the Gothic section of the WoD, which is maps 4, 5 and 6. And it's another fairly pure kind of arena map. I personally find this one really quite tense. There's a lot that can go wrong. It's quite based on movement, because there's a lot of enemies that do actually have projectiles you can dodge, particularly Mancubi, Revenants, and a couple of Archfiles as well. It's also the first map in the WoD which is quite heavily based on the rocket launcher. So after some initial fighting with the super shotgun, you eventually get the rocket launcher, which you use in a really big, quite challenging, tense fight when some Archfiles warp in, about halfway through the map. And you will see shortly that the real reason why this map is actually called Revolution is because there's a fantastic opportunity to cause some really good infighting between, I think it's about 12 or 14 Revenants on UV versus the Spider Mastermind, which is visible right from the beginning as soon as you actually teleport into the main part of the map. So I felt like this was quite a good way to introduce the Spider Mastermind in a small map, because of course all the maps in Sucker Punch are very small, and the Spider Mastermind is a very large enemy. So giving it no room to move, but putting it in a position where it could see and cover quite a large amount of territory seemed like a good way to actually include it in this map set of very small maps. You can see that movement is really quite important, and ammo is fairly tight when there's a lot of Revenants, and also there isn't that much room to manoeuvre particularly in this map. But I think it works nicely. I think it's a map that you really need to play quite a few times to understand how best to kind of avoid or tackle the waves of enemies. More often than not, the Spider Mastermind actually loses the fight against Revenants. In this particular case it survives, but it only takes a few super shotgun blasts to take her down. With map 7 we get into the third and final set of 3 maps in Sucker Punch. This particular map is called Compression, and it starts off a kind of more industrial set of 3 maps, and after 3 quite arena oriented maps in a row, the middle Gothic maps 4, 5 and 6, 7, 8 and 9 are all a little bit more like conventional Doom maps, or certainly 7 and 8 are. This particular map, as I said, it does introduce this kind of industrial look, and it's reminiscent of the first 2 maps of this whole set, with just moving through these relatively straightforward rooms in a slightly more industrial setting with sort of low to mid-tier monsters mostly, but a couple of like key set-piece fights, in particular the one which is to do with the blue key, which appears just here, and similar to map 2 there's another underground flooded area just after this Mancubus is taken down. Of course you've got the green detailing, which is just like maps 1 and 4, so starting off with a relatively easy map for the new theme. This underground area I think is probably the best part of the map. It's a cool fight. I think, which works quite well. It's quite challenging. On UV there is this pain elemental. On lower difficulties it's just a cacodemon, so that was the way I chose to kind of balance the difficulty levels in this particular fight. And then the map really loops back round with a few shot levels I can make. You can see that there's quite a lot of these brick textures, which is how I try to differentiate these maps a little bit from maps 1 to 3 in terms of their visual theme. Again, similar to map 1, you've got a significant amount of backtracking once you actually get the blue key, but it's still a very short, kind of economical map. Another thing this map does, which is happening for the first time in Sucker Punch, is it does actually have an outdoor area, albeit a very small one, and it's only really accessible via a secret. So by just going through this short tunnel here, you can teleport out into the exterior area, which is otherwise only visible from very near the start position. There's a couple more secrets which I've left hidden in this particular video. A trap here in a curved corridor. You'll notice that there's very little in the way of like curved architecture in Sucker Punch, just because as a new mapper it's quite a difficult thing to do. After the Revenants, it's pretty much straight shot to the end of map 7. A few people have very kindly made video playthroughs of Sucker Punch before, last year, and I think most of those people agree that map 08, which I called Nothing Dead Will Go, which you might recognise as a line from the Terminator, most of them agree that this is probably the best map that I was able to make for Sucker Punch, and I think, to be fair, they're probably right. This is the second of 3 maps in the industrial phase, the final phase of Sucker Punch, and there's a few things I really consciously tried to do differently with this map, which I think contributed to it being the best map of the set. I think the main one is probably that it's non-linear. So all of the previous 7 maps are very, very linear in one way or another. They're either kind of point A to point B type of maps, or they're arena maps. Map 08 is quite non-linear, so there's actually 3 paths you can take from where the player starts playing. Another reason is that the rocket launcher hasn't been used very much in earlier maps. In this map, it's mostly the only weapon you use, so it's a real playground for the rocket launcher. And part of that is the fact that in this map there are no low-level enemies at all. So really the weakest enemy you'll ever encounter is either the Revenant or the Hell Knight, depending on which way you look at it. So it's really, there's a lot of quite meaty enemies in this map. The monster count isn't that high, but all of the monsters are quite strong. So the non-linearity, being able to really let loose of the rocket launcher, and some higher tier monsters to play against all contribute to giving this map a different feeling, so hopefully it fits a real niche within Sucker Punch as a whole. I'm also quite pleased with the look of this map. I think this is the one where I managed to make the kind of industrial look work quite well. I think the water creates a little bit more variety. There are also some nested secrets in this map, which I've only shown one of, but it's nice to find some secrets which nest within one another, so that once you find one, if you're observant, you can actually find 1 or 2 other ones as well. I think the yellow detailing works quite well in this map. I've chosen yellow detailing to mark out the fact that this is like medium difficulty basically, compared to map 7 easier and map 9 harder, which is the procedure I used all the way through Sucker Punch. And one of the things that I think works quite well is the fact that because the map is non-linear, it's possible to trigger certain fights in different ways, because you can cross line defs in the map which create ambushes from multiple different directions, which means that you can actually go through different versions of that fight. And the number of secrets that you find determines how much plasma cells you actually have, which determines how you approach this final fight, which is very straightforward, just in terms of facing a bunch of Hell Knights and a Baron at the end of the map. But you may or may not have a lot of plasma to help with you. And then there's this final kind of mean chain gunner trap right at the end. So I think there's a few reasons why people are probably right to say that map 08 is probably the best in Sucker Punch. Okay, it's time for the final map, map 09. This is another really short one. It's called Hardpoint. It's the final map of the whole WOD and also of the industrial part of the WOD, obviously. And it's a full-on arena, which is really just the player versus a whole bunch of monsters in a very tight space. And it's all about using the BFG. So carefully timing BFG shots and making sure that the player collects enough cells to keep firing is really important to deal with these different waves of enemies. So in lots of ways, this map is a lot like map 3 from way back in the first part of the WOD, combined with this kind of newer industrial aesthetic, and some files of course. But having less choice of weapons and being more emphasis on the BFG. And it's pretty chaotic. Quite a lot of bodies lying around, especially with the enhancements that come with Smooth Doom. And in UV, once you've taken out one cyber demon at the start of the map, you have the pleasure of having to take out another one which teleports in. By far the biggest monster there that teleports anywhere in the world. But hopefully, once you've mastered maps 1 to 8, that shouldn't be too much trouble. That's map 09 done. I hope you've enjoyed this dev diary of Sucker Punch. And I hope you take the time to download and play the WOD yourself. And if you do, I'd love to know how you find it.